A very good afternoon to everyone. This is Ms. Indrakshi Bhattacharya from the BFSI board. Welcome everyone to the webinar on the topic Navigate Risks, Seize Opportunities, Identify, Improve Influence. And we are really privileged to have with us Sri Swakshar Basu sir as our speaker today. He is FCPA and RIMS CRMP. He is an Associate Vice President at Ravantage Asia Pacific, a Blackstone company. From the institute, we are really privileged to have with us CMA Partho Chaudhary, sir. He is our advisor of our PFSI board. Our chairman, sir, CMA Chittaranjan Chattopadhyay, sir. He will also be joining very soon. We welcome our chairman, sir. And we also have with us our team members. So just before we start, we are playing the institute's anthem first, and then we will continue with this program.
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मामृतं गमय
मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मामृतं गमय
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मामृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
So now I would request CMA Partho Chaudhary, sir. He is our advisor to give the welcome address. So,
Namaskar to everybody. I hope I am audible.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. Thank you very much, Indrakshi Madam. Respected Chairman of BFSI Board, CMA Chittaranjan Chattopadhyay, when he joins. Sri Basu, Associate Vice President at Ravantage Asia Pacific, senior officials from BFSI department, and my dear participants. It is a great privilege for me to get this opportunity to welcome the participants in this important webinar on navigating risk and seize opportunities. You can very well understand that navigating risk and availing of the opportunity that comes in the way by itself is a very challenging task. We are also very aware that in our profession, we cannot avoid taking risk when deciding any financial transaction or goal. Thus, the requirement of the day is that we have to fine-tune our abilities to avoid as much as possible high-risk ventures, of course, without compromising returns and rewards. Simultaneously, I want to flag this issue that risk assessment of new opportunities is a very difficult task, but we need to accept these opportunities after careful assessment of the risks involved. The main reason is these opportunities, if taken at the appropriate time, generally decides the future of our ventures and revenue, which is a very important factor in all our endeavor. Today, we are very happy to have with us Sri Basu, a senior professional from Ravantage Asia Pacific, whose firm provides high quality services related to risk management practices across different continents. Their worldwide presence helps them to build unique perspective of risk mitigation without losing opportunities. I am sure that Sri Basu will give us glimpses of that global perspective of the techniques used for balancing risk and opportunities, sometimes two seemingly opposite forces. It need not be mentioned further that as our country is getting more and more integrated with the world in different areas of economic developments, it is very important for us to take these opportunities which are coming in our way without compromising safety and security of our financial system. I'm sure that the participant of this webinar will be immensely benefited from Sri Basu's address, and I thank BFSI board for arranging such a webinar. Thank you very much for your time and Jai Hind. Back to Indrakshi, madam.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I had the privilege of introducing our speaker, Mr. Swakshar Basu, sir. The Swakshar Basu, sir, he is FCPA from Australia. He is an RIMS CRMP certified risk management professional. He is a master's in professional accounting in the University of Queensland in Brisbane. He is a Bachelor of Commerce from the St. Xavier's College, Kolkata. He is a dynamic risk manager and audit professional with extensive years of experience in risk management, internal controls and audit. Currently, he is spearheading enterprise risk management and facilitating business continuity management at Ravantage Asia Pacific Blackstone company with an increased focus on ensuring internal compliance and risk reduction in APAC region. He's recently, as a member of Parima, he was invited as a panel speaker to share insights on ERM and moving from spreadsheets to GRC platforms. From August 2020 till present, he is the Associate Vice President at the Ravantage Asia Pacific, a Blackstone company. We welcome you, sir. It's indeed a privilege for us to have you with us. So now we're requesting Sri Swakshar Basu, sir. Please share his.
Thank you so much, Indrakshi, ma'am, and CMA Parthu Chaudhary. The rest of the audience here, a very warm welcome and good evening, good afternoon to all of you back in India. Let me share my screen and then we can get started on this. Sorry, not this. One second. Let me know if all of you can, Indrakshi, if you can see my screen, just let me know. I will then put it on full zoom mode.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Okay. Shall I get started?
Yes, sir, please start.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for today's webinar and taking time out from the busy schedules. Today we're going to talk about navigating, how can we navigate risks, seizing the right opportunities, and the very important elements that goes around identifying the risks, improving the process, and then influencing some of the decision making that goes around the boardroom. So in terms of the table of content, we'll follow the following TOCs. So we'll do a recap, since this is the second webinar based on a continuation from what I had shared in my first webinar. So we'll do a quick recap, followed by we'll talk about the how do we implement ERM. So basically we'll speak a little bit about the ERM process, the risk management process itself. And then finally, we will talk about the remaining two, which is the how can we improve our current risk process, and quickly touch upon the important element of, as a risk manager, how do you influence the decision making? And I mean, talking to the senior leadership members and the boardroom people, making sure that you're on their side. In terms of the learning objectives today, what we wish to achieve from today's webinar is the following, right? So I want all of you to take away how can you all design an implementation plan. We'll then talk about the risk management process itself, having deep diving into areas of what constitutes this process, what are we talking about, and elements of that process. And this is a very large subject because it can go into a few hours only on this particular point, but for the purpose of our session today, I've made it concise. And then developing the risk competency. What is it that as risk managers we need to upskill ourselves on, knowing the latest trends. So we'll touch upon that. And finally, like I said, hopefully all of you can walk away with some thing on how do you influence decision making. So just a quick recap. I think for people who are joining back from the last webinar, thanks for all of you for rejoining the second series. But for the first timers, this is a quick recap of what I had discussed in the first webinar that was held. I think it was in around May or April or May, I think. So we touched upon the 4 aspects primarily. How do you align the organizational model? So before we jump into doing risk management, we have to be aware of understanding the internal the business model itself. What is that the business does, right? And then understanding the internal and the external environment of that business. Who are your primary stakeholders, your secondary stakeholders? And then I think a large part of that is definitely understanding the organizational culture. Without that, if you don't read the room, you will lose it. So organizational culture is something which we have to be very, very right on. We have to understand the various nuances because we deal with stakeholders from various, I would say in my case, globally. So there are different ways of doing understanding and reading the pulse. So the behavioral biases. So some you have to understand what goes best with certain individuals and therefore for example, some of your board of directors, you got to understand their behaviors and therefore pave the next way forward. So essentially aligning yourself to all these elements are the key. So this is what we discussed in our previous webinar. In terms of why ERM, I think when I was speaking about this particular point, the emphasis was really on the benefits of what risk management brings in. If I can think of a recent example, and I have a couple of case studies toward the end of the slide. If you think about the recent airline crash that's happened, one kind of sits back and realize risk management is such a critical element in the space of airline industry. And this is not just relevant or limited to just one industry, it is cross-wide. Imagine, I think today or yesterday, there was a news that came out in terms of front running of, it's called Jane Street front running case. And SEBI has actually went ahead and I think banned this particular trader. So again, it goes on to show that how diverse risk management is. And if you don't do it well, then it can really cost you financially. It can really cost a lot in terms of financial losses. So last time we spoke about the interconnectedness, how risk management or the identification of risks are so interconnected, and rather than looking at a silo, which is the traditional way of doing risk management. So we spoke about that. I then had shown a slide where we talked about the global risks ranking by severity. Spoke about the proactiveness part of it. I think an interesting slide on that global risk ranking, if I recall, was certain risks across the Asia Pac were kind of repeatedly coming in as risk number 1, 2, or on the top quartile, top 5%. And it was interesting to see how India is comparing with, let's say, the peers in Asia. And then obviously proactiveness in terms of proactive risk management rather than being reactive. And lastly, rather I would say preventing regulatory breach. So why is ERM important? You obviously then, if you do it well, if you do it right, you prevent the breach of regulatory violations. And then agility. I think it really helps you prepare. Helps the organization be ready and be prepared in terms of any eventualities that might happen. So those were the reasons why you need ERM. Next we talked about risk strategy. So like in everything else, you need a strategy before you can go in. So establishing a risk strategy approach. What's going to be the should we take a what kind of strategy do we lead into or take? We then talked about the risk appetite, the risk tolerance levels. These things have to be set by, last time I spoke about it. So these things have to be really set by your leadership, ideally by the board of directors. It should come from the top, and then that's how you get leadership support. And then finally, that led a little bit, we touched upon very, very briefly on the risk response and what this really means. Today we will go, we'll talk about it a lot more. And the last point was really on risk culture and governance. So this is really talking about, like I said, it touches upon from the first point. But in this particular, when I spoke about this section, it was a little bit deeper into understanding what really is culture. What do you define? What's the definition of risk of a culture of a company? And then spreading the right awareness. How do you do it? So today we will talk a lot more on that. So risk training, we talked about briefly on incident management, the three lines of defense. Talked about the core components of that and the governance structure, which is the top down and the bottom up. So these things were kind of briefly touched upon. I think the ICMI BFSI Institute already has the slides, so it can be shared with the members. Right, let's deep dive. Hopefully this would be something interesting and insightful for you, for the members. And once again, I would like to thank BFSI and the chairman and the committee for allowing me to have a second webinar on this topic. Okay, so I think without further ado, let's kick off. So before I go about doing anything, right, I would need a plan. So this is really the implementation plan. In the implementation plan, there are many stages. So I mean, I've briefly summarized it, but it really goes from a lot more than having a structure, process, analysis, strategy, and people. From a structure perspective, we all need to define the scope of what is it that we are trying to assess. So, set the priorities correct for implementation. We need to think about what do we actually go into doing risk management on a smaller universe, or is it the entire universe that we want to kind of go and do? It's not audit, but it's it's kind of dependency on audit is there, because you're obviously, as a risk manager, you're a second line of defense, and the audit is your third line of defense. So it's interconnected, because what you do becomes an output for the internal audit, and vice versa. Internal audit report kind of becomes an input for you. So it helps in scoping. And I would say it sets the priorities. You have at the very start, you need to set the priorities for implementation. Next up on processes, I think this is where you need to have built up a strong, a strong methodology, or at least a sort of a guided methodology, a planned structure of how you want to gather that data. What would be your potential source of truth? What is that you go ahead and ask for, right? And then you start doing the information gathering. You then engage the stakeholders. You then familiarize yourself with the processes. So there are many ways of doing it. In terms of data collection, the way I have done it in the past, and even now as we mature, is really asking about existing policies, existing processes, understanding if the company has a their mission statement. There are many other things. For example, you can actually look into the annual reports. So they become your source of information. You just try to gather data without knowing what you're going to do with it. You obviously will filter that out. But at the start, the more the data you have, at least on the initial understanding phase, it only helps you to streamline your processes and your methodology moving forward when you start identifying, moving forward when you start analyzing the risks moving in the value chain. So engaging stakeholders is a key thing, because here you need to know whom you want to speak with. You can't be, if you're a single source or maybe a smaller team, you can't be speaking with everyone in the company. So ideally, you want to sort of limit yourself to speaking with the chief of staff, head of departments, at least getting a initial walkthrough understanding or a meeting of what is that their function does. Simple questions like, do you know what are the strategic goals, and if you see there's a disconnect, you already know that there could be a potential risk. Or if they don't have any SOPs or any policies in place, are their processes mapped in there? A single round of interview with the process owners or the head of function, chief of function staff kind of reveals that, and you would know how robust the processes are. Are they working efficiently? Are they not? Of course, at this stage, you're not in a position to validate the information. You're only there going into a business to understand it. So which is fairly at the initial stage. So once you have done that a few rounds, and there are various methods of doing it, you can do walkthroughs, interviews, and all that. Then you start analyzing the information, right? So once you've gathered so much of data, imagine you've got all this data collection and information gathering, right? What do you do with that? Is then you start analyzing it, you organize it first, you prioritize next, and then you start analyzing it as you think, what is it that I need to look into, right? And to understand this. And risk management is really about this stage. I mean, the process itself is really analyzed within risk analysis. It's a small word, but actually it has got identification, evaluation, assessment, a bit of reporting and also in there. So it's a massive universe inside this particular small risk analysis part of it. Next up, I would say you would then have a strategy in place in terms of having a timeline. So it is not just enough to have just an implementation plan without a strategy. You have to have some key milestones mapped out. You have to think about the budgets, because if you're buying a tool to help augment with your risk management work, then you need to have a tool in place. You need to have deliverables. You need to understand and communicate to the management that these are my deliverables that would happen on a quarterly basis or semi-annually basis, whatever the frequency you wish to report on, and then communicate accordingly, and then go ahead with your implementation. Lastly, the most important part of this whole chain is the people part. So skill, I think you need to have the right people to do any job, right? So same goes for risk management. You can't be working on your own and thinking that I will be managing risks completely. It doesn't work like that. So you have to have risk champions you have to start identifying this risk champions along the way. You have to push the risk responsibility to the process owners, because they are really they are the ones who really own the risk, not you or me. We are risk man. I mean, at least for myself, I'm a risk manager, but I don't really own the risk. I'm a facilitator. I look at myself as more of an advisor who is able to strategically or laterally think through across enterprise and navigate that discussion forward. But from a skill perspective, if you're working alongside collaborating across departments, you definitely need to have build or upskill people with the right risk competencies, and therefore that'll sort of define or determine the resources that are required moving forward. So that is really the implementation side of things. In terms of next slide, so this is something which is like a roadmap. So I've assigned it, I've aligned it, or rather I've designed it in a manner where if I were to go and do a risk management, if the management wants me to go and implement risk ERM, enterprise risk management, how would I do it, right? So the key things that I think you can take away from here is there are various phases. You don't have to do everything in the first month or in the first 3 months. It's a gradual progress, and you show these progresses as you walk through the year, and then you can show all your sort of incremental progress as you walk through the calendar. So let's say, I know we are in July 2025, but let's say we walk backwards a little bit in April 2025, and that's where I set the foundation. I would call it as a phase 1 foundation. This is the stage where I don't have anything, right? So I just know that management wants me to establish a risk management function, and that's it. So what do I do is and this is obviously applicable for companies who are either launching a new service, right? Launching a new risk function, or you're hiring somebody internally or externally where you want that risk function to be exercised, to be developed, and this then becomes a roadmap for that process. So phase 1 foundation, you really start building out your risk policies, your framework. You start thinking about the roles and the responsibilities, who is going to do what, who is in charge, who's going to take decisions, and pretty much thinking of a preparer, reviewer, sort of a thing, except the fact that there's a lot more in there where you think about who is responsible, who is going to be accountable for once the risks are identified, who is going to mitigate these things, and so on and so forth. So clearly a well thought of roles and responsibility map has to be there. And these things take time. I mean, it's not going to be in one discussion or a couple of discussions. They will evolve as you go through. People change all the time, so you will have to think of a primary contact. If the primary contact is not there, a secondary contact needs to be there, and things like that. Next up in June, when we are a couple of months forward, we then talk about the phase 2, which is the context. We set the context. Now in this phase, really once we have done the policy and framework, it then leads nicely to setting the categories, right? What is it that we're going to be reporting on? What is it that we're going to be, forget reporting on, but more on what are the things that we're going to identify risks on? So that is really setting the risk categories. You get, I mean, a few examples later I have on the slide, but just for the sake of sharing now, you would have categories such as operational, compliance, financial, reputation, etc., etc. So you start kind of really thinking on, okay, my business is operating in this kind of environment, so I must be having exposure to these categories, right? And then you start building from there. At least you establish the risk categories first. And then you talk about the risk appetite. You kind of establish that risk appetite right from the top, which I was explaining in my recap slide. This is a very critical thing. Without having a risk appetite, you are not going to move much, because at the end of the day, when you're evaluating a risk without a risk appetite, it's like measuring something against its benchmark. And if you don't have the benchmark, then you don't really know how much you're deviating by, right? So risk appetite is something which has to be defined. Need not be super complex or sophisticated, but just needs to be enough to get you moving in terms of the risk management. So, and it has to ideally come from the board members or the senior, at least the CEO, the top brass, the top senior management has to give you this guide. You on your own as a risk manager, you can advise, you can obviously have your own opinion on what should be the risk appetite, but it has to come from them. Next up, is risk committee members. You need to form a risk committee because otherwise, as a risk manager, what are you going to do? You have to have a forum to have these discussions, and that risk committee is really the platform for decision making, for giving you approvals or rejections on the mitigations, really discussing on the actions, the status, and all of that. So the risk committee ideally will report straight to the board oversight committee. Sometimes it also can be board risk committee, but this risk committee, I mean, this can be a senior management plus the board. If it's board plus senior management, then you have at one shot you have the board risk committee. But if you don't, then at least you have a risk committee internally within the company, which then reports up to the at the board level. And then, I mean, that really then joins up to what I was just saying about the reporting structure. So you need to have this again goes back to the recap where I was talking about the governance structure. So that's really the reporting structure where you need to identify or at least set how you want the risk to be escalated up the chain. So from a team member to a manager to, you know, let's say laterally to the risk committee, to the risk manager, all the way up to the risk committee, right, and then to the board. So and there are various escalation routes that would take place. So reporting structure is really key. At this stage, we are only going to be somewhere down at the reporting structure. We have established the basic foundations and the context. And we are then moving into 2 months forward, 2 months forward into August. This is really where we set our phase 3, which is where we then set the scope. Now, setting the scope is what I just touched upon earlier. So what it really means is that to determine, or you can say narrow or broaden the scope, whichever way you want to go about it, you need to establish a culture and an awareness, and you need to deliver at least some kind of knowledge, materials, and some trainings, just like the way I'm doing it, right? So without that, you are not going to get people on your side, so they will not know what language are you speaking. What is it that you want to do with them? Are you giving them more work, or is it? So you have to kind of narrate the story or stitch the story in a way, in a manner where you have the risk, the trainings. Through the trainings, you kind of deliver the message that actually this is done so that we can have you guys as the risk champions, or identify some risk champions from there, depending on the participation. 2 months forward, now we are in phase 4 in October, and this is really the implementation stage. So this is where the heavy lift comes, right? In this stage, you are looking to really go out there and talk to the leaders, talk to the process owners. You kind of start identifying the risks. This is really where you need business understanding. You need to be aware of what is it that I want to report on the risk register, right? You cannot be just, think of it in this way. At least one of the challenges I faced was in the initial days, people did not really have an understanding of the problem between risk and issues and complaint box. So you have to literally have that pushback to say, this is not really a risk that you're reporting. It has to make a business sense. Ultimately, it has to hit or affect or impact my company strategic objectives, my business goals, or the departmental goals that if it's affecting one of the KPIs, then that is a risk that we should talk about. If it's affecting a process, if it's affecting inefficiencies or too much of errors happening, those are the discussions that you need to at least pivot towards the process owner or the person that you're interviewing or discussing, to make them think like that, right? So that is where you really start identifying good quality risks in your risk register, and then you launch. Obviously, you communicate that with your senior management. You have a deadline. A deadline in mind, and then let's say come October 31st, we are launching ERM, and then we are launching the risk register. And my first baseline risk register is out in October. Fast forward to the end of the year, we are now in risk reporting phase. So this will be our first reporting where we have started assessing the risks, And then we've started evaluating against the risk appetite and then reporting the risk response. So this would be in December of 2025, where we can do it through a PowerPoint slide way, or you can, if you're a bit more, if you bought a tool, then the tool will do it for you. Or if neither, then at least using some Power BI to create some dashboards. And then lastly, the phase 6, so monitoring. In terms of monitoring, I think here here what we do is, once you've done this in 2020, so let's say fast forward in 2026, you are then going to do a risk update. So this I haven't given any particular date, but anywhere once you're a little matured, you then have, you update the risk register, you review, you kind of start doing the reassessment of risk, because by now the risks that you started identifying in October, if you're doing this in October of 2026, then it's already 1 year. So you got to reassess, and things change. The business landscape is changing. If you look at 2025, there's so many different, the way it started and the way it is right now. I mean, we have seen a pretty terrible 2026. So I would say you kind of, things change all the time. So it's evolving. So therefore you reassess those risks in 2026, and then obviously continuously monitoring them as you start reassessing that. So those two are really are the these two slides are really the implementation side of things. Okay, this one in terms of risk management process. So I have modeled this based on ISO 31000 to outline the various stages of risk management. So there are actually officially there are 5 stages, but I've broken it down to not crowd this a little bit. Is to have that risk reporting, the monitoring part of it as well. So we start from establishing the context. I think, as I was speaking just now, you need to start defining as a risk manager, our first task, our step 1, is really to define the context and aligning with the strategic objectives of the business. So it could be reorganization of the group, it could be strategic capital management, it could be long-term growth prospects, but your risk management strategy has to align 100% with these risks, with these business objectives. You may not need to align to a 5-year, 10-year long-term prospect, but at least a 1 to 2 year or at least a 1 to 3 year roadmap, so that if there are many capital projects coming through, or if there are a lot of market expansions that would happen, your risk management strategy has to look into those aspects, or at least has to be aligned with that. Next up is identification. I think in terms of identification, what is critical here is we need to establish a very, very robust process with all the process owners. It has to be clearly documented of what was the problem, what are the various impacts of this, and what really led to this, and why did it happen. And there are many methods of doing this, and I'll touch upon a couple of them in the following slides. But risk identification really is, you can sort of identify risks through a SWOT analysis or brainstorming and many other aspects, many other ways, methods. These two are pretty popular, and I use it. Use of risk assessment tools. There are many tools in the market, but I use just a simple risk register. We call it a risk control self-assessment tool, RCSS, so that you use a tool to essentially, the outcome of that is you need to build a risk register, which then acts as a central repository for you to document risks. That becomes a talking point, and it becomes a reference point every time you walk into a risk committee. You then have to refer to this risk log or risk register and update the various actions, the status, etc. While identifying risk, I think one of the other key elements that I've seen is historical data. So you need to, as a risk manager, we need to look into the rearview mirror and identify the trends that, I mean, look at the incident that have happened and hopefully establish a trend so that these things don't recur, and reduce those recurring vulnerabilities along the way. Risk analysis is next. I think this is really the meat of the process. So while doing a risk analysis, we need to first step is to understand the current controls. You need to, as a risk manager, you need to have a very strong grasp of the existing controls that are in place. Without this, you are not going to do a sort of a well-established risk management, because if you're going without understanding of the controls, you're essentially, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but there is a difference between an inherent risk and a residual risk. So the concept of inherent risk is something where you assume that though you don't have controls in place, or at least not enough robust controls in place. The risk of measuring things as an inherent risk is everything will become a bit more highly elevated risk rating, which means that you would have a not so accurate picture of the risk severity. Whereas if you actually understand the controls, you start evaluating it, you then start assessing the risks by looking at those existing control strengths, the effectiveness of those controls, and then you start assessing the residual part, the residual risk after this control, after assessment or after assessing the effectiveness of the controls, you then look at the residual part of it. And that then goes into the risk reporting. So I would say so when you do risk analysis, one of the things you must do is conduct an analysis of the residual part of it, but against what? Against the criteria that you set. You assess likelihood. In this case, there are various methods that one can follow. They can follow a 4x4 or a 5x5 model. In this case, I have followed a rare, unlikely, possible, likely, and almost certain kind of bandings, which is a 5x5. And then you assess the impact. So impact is basically from anywhere ranging from insignificant, which is the lowest, to the severe most, which is like the highest. So you have to assess the risks that you identified across these metrics. And then you have the risk rating. Out of this, the product of likelihood and impact would then give you a score, which is between the 1 to 5 scale. And that will help you prioritize. That will help the risk register and the viewers and the readers to prioritize the risks. So everything which is kind of we follow a red, amber, green, a RAG chart. So let's say anything which is a medium or a high, or a very high and a high risk rating would then form the majority of your discussions in the risk committee meetings. Which is why it's become so important that you need to assess the controls, right? And then you start analyzing against the risk thresholds, once you have started analyzing it, you then measure it against your risk appetite. What is the risk appetite of the company of this particular risk category, for example? Broadly, the risk category, the risk appetite has to be defined at the risk category level. Yeah, the risk appetite has to be defined at the risk category level. So if you're assessing a risk category which is operational or compliance, you need to, if the risk severity score comes out to be high, but your risk appetite is very high. Sorry, your risk appetite is medium, then you need to treat that risk because your risk score is higher than that risk appetite. So that's how really it kind of works in real life. And then there are many ways of doing a risk analysis. So the popular methods I know of are Ishikawa and bow tie analysis and the SWOT analysis, which I'll touch upon. And then you can also do a scenario analysis. Other methods would include a stress testing of a particular variance, and look sort of stress tested out across a period of 360 days and see how much the vulnerability exists on any one given day. Stage 4, then we talk about on the left-hand side of the screen, stage 4, we talk about risk treatment. So here really what has come down to you've finished your analysis. You now know based on the analysis your risk has to be treated. So you then select the right response, appropriate response. And this is where collaboration comes in. You then start challenging the status quo. As a risk manager, you have the liberty to challenge the the process owner or the functional head to say, actually, I don't think this is the right risk response because the risk is still elevated. So you start, there are many, there are four options really of risk treatment. So you can avoid the risk, you can reduce, you can transfer, you can accept it. Mitigation action plan should be clearly documented in the risk register, because otherwise you will one will easily forget. You would not know why was this risk accepted or why was this risk transferred unless it's documented out. So there's a small column, there should be a column which should say rationale for risk response, for example. Examples I've given, like for example, I've said you can include avoiding concentration risk by opening up new routes through strategic partnerships. You can even have a risk mitigation such as your cyber risk is a little high, and therefore you reduce the cyber threat by enhancing your resilience, cyber resilience. If the risk manager decides not to, high rated risk, if there's a risk which is highly rated, rated highly, without any risk mitigation, if the high rated risk they don't have any risk mitigations in place, it must have a risk acceptance rationale documented. And furthermore, it has to be endorsed by the risk committee, because if you're having a rate which is rated high, and if you haven't done anything to mitigate it, tomorrow if the risk actually eventuates and becomes a reality, as a risk manager, you would really be in a dubious situation, because you wouldn't know why was such a decision made. And also in terms of accountability, you don't want to be exposed to a scenario where you clearly wanted this risk to be mitigated, but because you did not act on it faster, or you did not really have it documented, you don't know what justification should be in place. So it's more to protect you as well as a risk manager. So it must be documented, and it must be endorsed by the risk committee. So everyone is aware that the risk is high, but we are choosing to accept it. Okay. Stage 5 and stage 6 are really the last two stages. So risk monitoring, you monitor the material risks that are there. So again, it comes from the risk prioritization side of things. You then start the risks which are rated moderate or above. It must be reviewed. This is a slightly mature stage. Once you've established your risk register and your risk process is running smoothly, those risks which are kind of moderately rated or above, it must be reviewed at least once every quarter to assess whether the progress of treatment actions and changes in the business environment kind of has changed the rating of the risk or not. And risks which are lower rated or very low rated, it can be reviewed once every 6 months to once every year. That's also okay. And then while you are monitoring, you must start thinking about reporting on the key risk indicators. And lastly, in the risk reporting, I think risk must be reported, like I said, to the risk committee. You must use the best of their time because they are really busy people. So you need to highlight and prioritize the material risks that are relevant for them, for having that discussion and having an action point coming out of. You want the risk committee to make a decision, not just be a one-sided you highlighting the risk and there is no action from their side. So therefore, make the best of the time in the risk committee, usually about an hour you'll get. So within the first 15-20 minutes is when you start reporting, you start talking about the high rated material risk and what actions has been suggested, so that the risk committee can make a decision on it and say, okay, approved, go ahead, or not go ahead, no go. Remember one thing, that when you are looking at prioritization reporting must be at an aggregate level, which means that you might have 50 risks in there, but you don't go and report all 50 risks. You kind of look at, let's say there are 6 or 7 risks which are operational risk and they are all high. You then have a score, aggregated score of all this operational risk as whatever the number is. So that'll still be high because every single one of them is a high risk. You can choose to implement dashboards to track risk status, the progresses, mitigation progress, and actions, and all of that. This would help in the risk committee to to enhance the visibility of risk reporting. Okay. On this slide, I think what I've done is I've summarized a few questions that I like to ask to my process owners or risk owners in terms of risk identification, and basically looking at the various aspects, right? So identification, analysis, treatment, monitoring, and reporting. In terms of identification, the things that I like to ask is, what events or occurrences did they have that could threaten the outcome of the business objectives, right? Can this reoccur? If so, what factors would cause the event to reoccur, right? What is the root cause of this risk? What is the impact of the risk to the business? Does it affect single or does it affect multiple business units? So this is really at the risk identification stage. Remember when I was saying that you need to help the interviewer or the risk manager, sorry, not the risk manager, the process owner to help you give the right risks identification. This is what I meant. So you have to kind of plan those questions so that some probing questions, these are all probing questions, so that you can actually get the right best response from them. In terms of risk analysis, when we move to that stage, we would then say, okay, how are they? I mean, this is for your initial understanding, right? So you would say, actually, if you're going there first time, you would then ask, how is the risk assessed with the risk scales of impact and likelihood? What are the controls in place? This is very, very important because you start really assessing risk versus existing controls. What is our risk appetite? You need to ask that question. Are risks identified interlinked to one another? Assessment is obviously very subjective, so you need to refer to the recent data, your incidents, claims, and internal and external data points, so that they can all be summarized and be used for your assessment, right? So that really is the goal when you're looking to analyze risk. In terms of treatment, I like to do it in the way that I like to have a clear cause and effect relationship. I would want to understand that. When I'm treating a risk, unless and until I understand the root cause and the effect of that, it is very hard for me to assess or determine that the treatment that the process owner is suggesting to me is the correct one or is going to mitigate it. It truly mitigate it. That means it's going to reduce the severity of the risk. So as a risk manager, you must have the maturity to understand the cause and the effect. What is the risk response chosen? So what risk response is chosen? So if residual risk is not acceptable or tolerable or exceeds the risk appetite, then the risk must be treated. This is what I was earlier alluding to. So clearly, if your risk score is higher than the risk appetite, then it's a very common sense, right? You have to kind of treat that risk. You can also choose to. There's the other school of thought that can say, no, actually, no, I would not treat this risk. I would accept the risk because I would exploit the opportunity. That's also fine, but that also has to be documented down because you're saying that the cost, you do a cost benefit scenario analysis, a risk reward analysis or risk reward scenario, and then you determine that actually the rewards are higher than the risk, which is fine. In that case, you start exploiting the opportunity. Lastly, are risk owners aware on where the risk mitigation should be documented? Do they know? Right? So you have to ask that questions. Sometimes when you ask these questions at the initial stage or when there are role changes, you kind of know whether the process is working efficiently or it is not. If they have never heard, like, where do we need to document risk, and we have no idea. If you have a tool in system, if you have a tool in place, a system in place, and they don't know how to use the tool and where to document the risk mitigations, then as a risk manager, it's my failure because I have clearly not done proper training and awareness. I have not set the culture. I have not even understood what the culture of the company is like looking like at the moment entails. And without understanding that, I went ahead and started doing risk identification, which then makes you walk back a couple of steps and you start rebuilding those gaps. Now, in terms of monitoring, I would like to ask a question as to how is risk monitoring performed today? So are you using the risk register as the source of truth, as the golden source of truth? Or is there a reporting regime already there in place and that is tracking the risk somewhere which is stored? Or where is it? Right. So I would ask these questions. Has the risk owner been identified? Like I said, risk owner, remember one thing when you're setting this on your own, if you have a team or if you're doing this individually, the initial lift may be doable, may be possible, but as the journey progresses, I think it becomes more and more challenging on you to perform everything from keeping the records updated, up to date, having those discussions, committee meetings and reportings and everything. It becomes very, very challenging. So you must think of that I have to hand it over to the risk owner. The risk owner is then responsible for really updating the risk treatment plan. It is not your responsibility to do it. Risk owner or a process owner ideally eventually is the person who would start updating this once it becomes BAU, right? And lastly, you need to ask the question that is it an automatic way of tracking and monitoring the risk? This can only be done if it's a tool, unfortunately. So I mean, Power BI and tracking dashboards can work, but you still need to update the query or the Excel that feeds into that Power BI. It can be a little complex, but ideally, if you have a system in place, then that's best because you can actually have the it's an automatic way of tracking and real-time monitoring that can take place. In terms of risk reporting, the last one, I would say I would ask a question to this one. Actually, I will ask the leaders through a survey. There are various ways of doing it. I mean, like I said, risk management is such a vast topic. Every little aspects can break into a conversation. But just to come back on track. So risk reporting, ideally, you should go and ask the senior leaders, the people who are the influencers, the decision makers. Ask them, like, do you think risk management not risk management, risk reporting is being effective? Do you get the most updated information on a regular basis? If the answer is no, then it's not working. It's failing. But if there are positive responses from at least a majority of your senior leaders, then at least you can walk away with pride, saying that okay, the process is actually truly working. And what happens as a part of it, as a result of that, is your internal auditors will start then relying on your risk management, the framework, the register, start looking at what you have looked into, how the risks were rated, what were the controls recommended, actioned, etc., etc. So this then really falls into the last part of our content today, which is, does risk reporting ultimately help in decision making? Does it help the management in providing valuable insights? Ultimately, what is our objective? Our objective as a risk manager is to make the best efforts to integrate risk management into day-to-day business activities. Why? Because if you do that, then you're automatically addressing operational risks, you're addressing compliance risk, you're addressing market, strategic risk every day, right? And that would then help to really showcase the incremental benefits as a risk manager that you're bringing to the table. And trust me, when you have cases like airline crashes and all of that, or a frontline trader doing front running of trading, then you know how critical the risk manager's job becomes. So just to give you an example, I recall when I was in the Middle East for a while, and this is an interesting story because I think we can all, I mean, at least I can relive this in the sense that the geopolitical tensions when it is currently at its peak right now between Israel and Iran. I remember the time when we had the Gulf of Hormuz closure threat. We had the blockade, around by the neighbors, and the problem was literally the geopolitical uncertainty was at its peak. And how do you maneuver then? So everyone then looks into the risk managers' inputs. Ideally, a think tank was formed, was established, and then we started thinking of scenarios and really activating the contingency plans, activating some of this. I mean, based on the scenarios, thinking about the contingency plans, and making the appropriate measures, the risk management, risk reduction measures. So one can really sort of look into the risk managers' importance when adversaries kind of when the company faces or the environment faces strong adversaries. Until then, you're more or less playing a passive role, but something as major as that happens, companies suddenly start panicking, and then the risk managers, everyone that comes into knocking into the rooms and the doors of risk managers. So risk management really, then you've got to ask the question that does it really help in decision making and providing the valuable insights? Okay, so I think the next two slides are really, we talk about a couple of root cause analysis techniques. So in terms of Ishikawa analysis, what is it, right? I don't know if most of you might be aware of it, but just to reiterate this, Ishikawa analysis is something which is a very popular root cause analysis technique. It asks, fundamentally, it is asking the 5 whys to work out the root cause. The magic is by the time you come to the 5th why, you actually have done a deep diving and you actually have the right root cause of the issue or of the risk. The main categories under this Ishikawa diagram includes all these processes, people, management, money, and environment. And these are defined by Ishikawa, but then obviously it can be customized to your business environment. But come to think of it, people, process, management, finance, and business environment is really what you need for measuring risks. So think of it in this way: it's like a bone of the rib, the ribs of the fish, right? So think of the each arrow as the bones of the fish, of which the first of the whys are asked. So analysis is asking you about 5 whys, why an error has occurred. We are talking about a problem where you have an error in transaction processing, and the category is a management category, right? And then you're asking so what method are we taking? We are asking the questions. The problem with errors in transaction processing, we're asking, why did it happen? Is it because of lack of review? Is it because of incorrect data entry? Was there not enough adequate training there? What about the cross checks and the alerts, auto alerts that are there? What about them? Did they not work? There was no one monitoring it. And lastly, what about the reviews? Are there not enough reviews in there? How did it miss out? So segregation of duties might come in here. Delegation of authority might come in here if the person approving was not there. So ultimately, when you come down to this method, you kind of really analyze what is the root cause of the problem, and then you determine the next step of what would be a right mitigation for this. Next one is even more interesting. I think this is something which I use on a regular basis. So the bow tie analysis. Now, this typically is used to depict a particular. So on the center of the diagram, the central knot that you see there is a risk event that have multiple causes and consequences with varying complexities, right? On the left hand side of the diagram, you have causes and controls. This is preventive controls. And the right hand side you have the consequences and the mitigating controls. So the step one is to identify the risk. You have identified the risk. An example I have given here is unauthorized access to sensitive data. It's a very generic risk, and I think it can happen in any company across the industry. So unauthorized access to sensitive data is a risk that you as a risk manager have identified with a collaboration, with communication from like an interview with the process owner. The next step for you to identify, so what? So what is the consequence, right? So if unauthorized access to sensitive data is happening, what is the consequence? Then you determine that actually it can happen, like you can have a loss of funds, you can actually have a regulatory fine, you can have some damages to the reputation, etc. And then you think about, okay, what caused this? What are the various causes of this? Come to think of it, you actually have, maybe it has come out from a phishing attempt. Maybe somebody has credentially stuffed your information. And lastly, maybe there's an application compromise. So it's one of the applications that users use have already been compromised. So therefore, it was already sitting the sometimes when the ransomware, the malwares happen, maybe the malware has already broken into the firewalls and it was sitting internally within one of the applications. So the application was already compromised. So that's the identification of the cause. Next up would be the preventive controls. Okay, so before the risk actually happens, what controls do I have in place to prevent this from happening? So one can say your IT or your security technical, technology operations person might say, actually, this is due to, not due to, this is, we have security hardening, multi-factor authentication, MFAs. We have already done some awareness and educational trainings on how to use, what to do, what not to do, rather, on the use of data. So there are some preventive controls in place. And lastly, you think about the mitigating controls. You've had this risk, this has happened, you know the causes, you know the consequences. What do you do now? So you then start putting in additional controls or mitigating controls. Through what? Through, say, you inject a detection and a response mechanism. You then start containing the affected application and start recovering the data if you can. And then obviously you have a root cause, you understand the root cause, and then you start doing a lessons learned. So these two techniques are popularly used techniques, in the world of risk management, at least in terms of analysis. Right? Okay, at this stage, what I'll do is, for the interest of time, I will post this question in the chat box, and then let me get a response from you guys. Just hold on a minute. Put it here. Okay, and then I put option A, brainstorming. Let's workshops. And focus groups. Okay, can I please request those who are attending to just give me some responses in terms of what methods and techniques do you use to identify risks in your company? Hopefully the chat is readable by everyone. Indrakshi, you can help me with the responses as and when, maybe just to Maybe just to chase a
Yes,
few
sir.
people. Yeah, thank you.
So the chat box actually is not available to everyone.
Oh, okay,
Just
okay.
yeah.
Maybe you can post it in a forum where
Yes,
people can see.
if we can post it in the question answer section,
Okay, okay, sure.
then everyone can see it. Okay, sir.
Okay, okay, wait, I'll do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think I've posted it. Hopefully it is visible now, yeah?
Yes, sir. The question is visible.
In the Q&A.
Yeah.
And Rashi can help me with the time checking. I'm doing all right so far with the time. I know you have a 2 hours to keep, so
Within 5, sir.
yeah. So right now it's about. Okay, yeah. So I will try to finish in the next 20 odd minutes so that we have enough time for the Q&A. Can I request people to just if you can read my question, just give me a response on what methods and techniques do you use to identify risks? Brainstorming, checklist, facilitated workshops, risk questionnaires, or focus group. Just a few responses will do. Can people type? I'm not sure.
Yes, sir. They have posted in this section. PMS Santosh Sharma, Kailash Pathak. I think so. You can
Okay,
also
okay, okay.
see
Oh,
this.
okay.
Yeah.
In the new one. Okay, got it.
Yes, yes, in the new one.
Okay. Yep. Perfect. Fantastic. I think yeah, we can use all of the above options to identify risks. I was asking mostly, what do you use? Is it like a favored one of the favorite things? Risk questionnaires. Nice. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is quite helpful. SWOT analysis. People have mentioned about PESTEL analysis and brainstorming. So it looks like any of the methods are quite a few favorites that from the audience. Let me share back my screen and move into. Okay, hopefully can see my screen back, I suppose.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you, people who have sent your responses. I think quite interesting to see the responses. Looks like if not one, but all, if not all, but one could be a favorite way of identification of risks. All right. So next, I would talk about this important slide here. So now we're really at the risk transfer stage. I mean, sorry, risk response stage. So in terms of risk response, it really depends upon the impact and the likelihood as to how high or how low it is. On the top part of the quadrant, on top right part of the quadrant, I would say is where the highest sensitivity is. So if you have a risk which is really, really high and it kind of it's beyond your company's risk appetite, the common answer is that you should avoid it. You should terminate that. When I say terminate, it's literally terminating the process. So with the risk, obviously you terminate the risk means you're terminating the process also. Otherwise, you can do a risk reward analysis. If the risks are, if the benefits outweigh the risks, then you can actually exploit the opportunity also. So this is something where it's more like in a game of blackjack, or doing gambling, right? You're looking at the number of the reds and the blacks, and you kind of even on a game of roulette, you're looking at the chances. So it's more about probability, and you're also looking at not just pure guesswork, but you have the analysis behind it. You do the scenario and you think that no, my return on investment, for example, or the number of chances I have, you have a benefit. You think that you can actually benefit from the risk that is there, in terms of playing that the round. So in simple words, and basically you exploit the opportunity if you have a chance to really expand into a particular market, for example. The risk might be there, but the benefits are far outweighing it, right? And even if there's a risk, you kind of know that, okay, this is the maximum amount of loss I can have, right? So again, if the maximum amount of loss is beyond, it's going to deplete your financial, I mean your revenue or your position very rapidly, then you have to avoid. Best is to terminate the risk. On the left hand side, on the same side of the lower side of the right hand quadrant. So if your likelihood is high, but your impact is low, then you kind of think of, okay, I can choose to mitigate the controls. So you're looking at either reducing the risk impact to acceptable levels, or you implement certain additional controls in place. On the left hand side, at the very lowest quadrant, you have, if the risk is anyways very low, so you can actually choose to tolerate that risk. You do not have to take any action. But if the impact is high but likelihood is kind of low, you're looking at sharing or transferring the risk to having, let's say, through an insurable risk or solution. So the bottom line is that we use the risk and control self-assessment and event data collection process to determine what should be our risk response. Remember, the key takeaway is we would have to measure these risks against our risk appetite. So that is what this says. For any risk exposure that is deemed to be not acceptable, the risk response should be defined, and risk response should be adapted to the context and tailored to either reduce or remove the likelihood or occurrence. I brought in the word velocity. The velocity is how quickly can it impact the business, and obviously the magnitude of that impact. Okay. In terms of monitoring risk, right? This is really at a stage where you have remember the risk management process where I spoke about all the way from identification, analysis, and then you're looking at reporting, and then you are just under reporting. There was basically, I'm talking about this particular slide. If I go back, you remember the risk monitoring part of it. So we are kind of here at the stage at the item 5 or stage 5. In that, when you come to monitoring, is really taking care of 4 important elements. So you prioritize and you monitor. That means the first stage is you prioritize and monitor. Second, you establish the metrics. Third, you measure and validate. And lastly, you report and follow up. What this really means that when you start prioritizing and monitoring, right, you need to identify risks that matter, that are material impact on the business. Otherwise, you don't start monitoring every single risk. I mean, over a period of time, yes. But on a quarterly cadence, on a quarterly basis, you don't monitor risks that are on the lower or on the very low side of things. So you identify, you set the priorities correct, you monitor the changes in the business environment. In today's day and age, a geopolitical uncertainty, when it is at its peak, think about the supply chain disruptions and how that impacts the cost elements across your suppliers, across your across your vendors, as well as your cost of doing business. Those are the things you need to prioritize and report. Secondly, you have to establish some key risk indicators against which you will start monitoring, or you will start, monitoring and set those alerts. So you must establish a schedule in the sense that maybe you will report, and this will be aligned with your risk reporting schedule, right? Third point, measure and validate. So here you talk about measuring the key risk indicator against my risk limits. The risk limits have to be set, and against that you will measure, and then you will validate the performance that, okay, I have reported 5 transaction errors throughout the month, throughout the last quarter. Has it gone down from last quarter? Has it gone down from last month or whatever? If it's gone up, then you need to validate the performance as to why is it gone up, what went wrong, and do a detailed gap analysis. In terms of reporting and follow-up, you need to develop a risk reporting mechanism. What should be reported ideally, what should be communicated, and then conduct the follow-ups, as is the case with any reporting. This slide here, I just wanted to leave the thought that, you know, the scale of risk can be varied. You can have a short, sharp risk. You can have a safety, for example, risk that can be, if that happens, a failure of a safety happens. You can have fatality, which has never happened before, but the scale of risk is very high because somebody is kind of, a worker has died on the work, the factory floor or premises. So it's a short, sharp risk. Risk can build over time, such as, like, for example, your concentration risk can be on a particular market. When people started relying on, like when COVID happened, there was such a lot of disruption with the supply chain. So risk kind of building it over time have a long lagging effect. And then there are slow burners, right? So proactive, basically the point is like you need to have proactive risk management in place, so that as a risk manager, you are able to anticipate the velocity of the risk that is going to impact you and the business. And therefore, that leads to having good, robust controls in place to reduce that evolving risk when it is least expected, right? Think of, Air India today is kind of having a little bit of a problem. So think about the risk that they are actually having, right? So all these years, maybe they didn't anticipate this kind of, maybe they did, but when it kind of hits the airline industry in such a manner, you needed to have control, robust controls anyways you needed to have, but this is more of an imperative for you to have the better controls in place so that passengers can trust the flight or trust the airline and start booking, right, and start flying. Okay, this one here is a little longish, too many words, but basically what is trying to say is I have laid out an example of a risk taxonomy with the risk category. So risk category level 1, I've broken down, I've basically categorized it across 5 areas: strategic, financial, operational, compliance, and technology. And the risk factors which lead to this risk category level 1 are also bulleted down. So if you have a read around it, so you've got, and on the strategic side, for example, I've got market expansion, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical uncertainties, which includes tariffs, political uncertainty, or interest rate violence, etc. Financial, the usual suspects are liquidity, interest rate, FX risk, credit risk. Operational, you have a lot of other problems such as transportation delays, delivery errors. Here you can actually bring in the transaction errors also. So these are your operational matters, everyday BAU stuff. Compliance wise is obviously you look at the regulatory environment, you have the data breaches, PDPAs, the violations in the ESG space, and then technology would be basically comprising entailing of the cyber governance and system failures. So the point of doing this slide was that I wanted you to walk away with that risks can actually fall between the silos that none of the leaders can see. So as a result of that, a significant risk that may be on the horizon can actually completely go unnoticed. Example of that I've given is, let's say there's a demographic shift occurring in the marketplace, whereby population is shifting towards large urban areas, and this is happening at a rapid pace. Now this was completely an oversight, and it can impact the strategy of a retail organization that has continued to look for a real estate in outlying suburbs, right? Imagine the kind of disconnect between the marketing team, the business development team, where they're kind of scouting around for a real estate space in the suburbs when no one's told them that actually there's a huge amount of population shift happening from the This is a real example, guys. By the way, I've just worded it differently in a case in South America without going to the detail, but this is really the disconnect that shows. Individual functions, the next bullet point, is another case study where I've said you can have the best of controls, but people always have a way of workaround, right? So this has to really be messaged in the right way. So individual functions may not understand how an individual response to a risk might trigger a significant risk in another part of the business. An example given is due to growing concerns about cyber, the IT function has decided to implement very tight security controls. But in doing so, employees have become frustrated and it's become confusing to them. So what have they done? They have started doing some workarounds. And typical human nature, we will always be looking at shortcuts and workarounds, right? So what you do is that you have the proper messaging around, make sure that your controls are not so complicated and confusing people that it should not be time consuming. It should be literally one can do within 30 seconds. Should not be that difficult, right? And last, the point that I want you to walk away with is risk can arise in any part of the business. It can affect either one or multiple functions. It is important to have that lens, that strategic thinking when you're evaluating the risk as a risk manager. Okay. The last part of the slide, we are talking about how can you improve your risk management process? Now there are various ways of doing it, but there's a formal way of where you can do a PDCA, the plan, do, check and act methodology, or an informal process of having a checklist in place. It really starts from continuously improving your capabilities and identifying the aspects where you think improvement is really needed. That is your start point. And then you start validating the continuous improvement options with you sit down with the stakeholders, you ask them what can we improve on, which part of the process is failing, is it identification, is it reporting? Remember the point where I mentioned that you go and ask the key questions to your stakeholders. It is really valid. It is all about that. So you kind of validate that information now. You then implement those options, and lastly, you monitor whether it is really performing as intended, right? Or if not, then you reassess that. The most important point is in the improving risk process, you have to think of trainings, right? Which is one of the things which I'm doing. I mean, this is externally I'm doing to the BFSI chapter, but internally also I've done many trainings so that I've made sure that people are upskilled. They're aware of what the risk methodology and the language really means. So from a strategy perspective, you must align. Firstly, like everything else, you must align your trainings with the business goals. What is it that the business wants? So align your goals, align your trainings accordingly, right? Do a gap assessment. Understand what is the gap, where are the gaps, and what is the future roadmap. Conduct those analysis. Think of the upskilling needs. You then develop the right curriculum, the right level of trainings that are required to address the gaps. And lastly, you evaluate the effectiveness of the effectiveness and build the risk competencies of senior leaders, risk champions, front office managers, etc., so that you understand that everyone is kind of now competent enough to do regular BAU risk reporting. It is no longer just under your headache to think of providing those kind of iterations and scenarios, so everyone can then come together and work on this. Quick poll question. I won't take much time. Maybe we just I'll quickly answer this. What can maybe I'll just post it very, very quickly. Just give me a minute. Maybe it'll take me about 30 seconds. Q&A. Okay, I have posted this question. There are 4 choices. What can a risk management professional recommend to protect an organization's critical infrastructure from a cyber attack? Is it implementing a password? Is it buying a cyber liability insurance? Sorry guys, this is like A, B, C, D. Yeah. So first option is your critical infrastructure from a cyber. Implement password. A, buy a cyber liability insurance. B, C is ensure employees do not post on social media, and D is monitor internet usage. So appreciate if you can give me a very, very quick response so I can move on with the scenario. Monitor internet usage. Waiting for some more responses to come in. Implement password, yeah. Yes, correct. So implement password, option A is the right answer. I will go back to my scenario. 1 second, my slide deck. Okay. All right. So the answer is basically implement a strong password. Okay. So the last part of my slide today is influencing risk-based decisions. So a lot of what we do today is really embedding risk management into the day-to-day activities and influencing the risk decisions. So what you do is you have a 5-step approach. You start from a strategy to you identify your stakeholder at each stage of the decision-making process. You understand the risk attitude because behaviors are very different for each. Like I was saying, globally, since I work with multiple leaders, so you have to understand the risk attitude of each of those decision makers and influences. You then start evaluating which decisions are actually making the biggest impact, and then you tweak your process accordingly. Integrating risk management into the day-to-day business. So that is really what rewards you as a risk manager, rewards the business in either financially saving or reducing the financial impact from having good risk management practices. And lastly, facilitating the risk dialogue and discussions with whoever it needs to be, right? Just having that cultural aspect so that it's a free flow of discussion, it's a dialogue, and you're really there at the leading the way as a risk advisor. Okay, so the last 2 slides, I have a couple of case studies very quickly. I'll run through it. So there is a global manufacturing company that has faced increasing disruptions in a supply chain due to geopolitical tensions. Raw material shortages have started happening. There are some transportation delays. Now, these disruptions are threatening production timelines and increasing the operational cost. Ideally, I would have loved to do this as a Q&A session, but interest of time, I will just sort of summarize the case study with the responses. So the risks that you identified, that you should identify here is like your supply chain disruptions, or interruptions that is resulting in the delivery deadlines and all that. And there's a loss of customer trust and revenue impact. Ideally, the loss of customer trust and revenue impact are documented in the impact section of the risk register. But in the interest of time, this is the all identified risk and its impact. So how did ERM help? So let's say if you are the risk manager, you have obviously deployed the enterprise risk management framework to identify, assess, and all of that. Through a cross collaboration committee, you have conducted a full supply chain assessment. You have gone through the critical suppliers checklist, how the supplier the assessments are being done, the exposure of the concentration risk, how high the concentrations are. You've implemented a real-time monitoring dashboard if possible. And then, I mean, implementation wise is probably towards the, it could be a mitigating control, but even if it could be an existing control as well, right? So implemented, you're basically, there's a risk real-time monitoring dashboard, and then the contingency plans are in place. So outcome is you've by doing this, you've reduced response time by 40%. You've successfully avoided a major production halt, and then leadership has gained some clear visibility into the operational risk. This has led to some better informed decisions. So you can clearly see by this example that how ERM has played a role in strategic planning. The company has improved the supply chain resilience, and then it has reduced the unplanned cost and enhanced the stakeholder confidence. Another case study. Here, a chemical company, manufacturing company, is specializing in high explosive for mining and defense applications. They operate in multiple facilities across the high risk regions. The company has faced an increasing regulatory scrutiny. There's some environmental concerns. There's constant threat of operational accidents due to the volatile nature of the product. So the risks that you identified are given already through the points, like risk of accidental explosions, regulatory non-compliances, environmental like contamination, and then reputational damages from a public or a stakeholder backlash. The implementation of ERM, how has it improved? You have started you've identified what are the HAZOP exercises that the company has done. What are the you have used some quantitative risk analysis models to evaluate the explosion probabilities, like a scenario planning or a stress testing. You map the regulatory, if there is a strong regulatory compliance that is already in place, then you just need to understand what are the various gaps that are, the risk identification perspective. What are the various gaps that are there that exist, in reporting? Some of the mitigation strategies that one can look into are real-time monitoring system for pressure, for temperature, and all of that, because it's a chemical, the plant production facility. You have then look into enhancing training, staff training programs on emergency response plans and emergency protocols. You build a risk heat map to inform the executives prioritizing on the high risk impact. And lastly, you can also look into the crisis response plan. So by doing this, you have achieved a 70% reduction in minor safety incidents. You passed some regulatory inspections. Your insurance premiums, you've actually managed to bring down or lower the insurance premiums through this. And lastly, the ERM framework not only mitigated the key operational compliance risk, but it's also shifted the company's culture from the reactive to a proactive approach. So with that, I would like to thank you and end my talk for today. I'm open to any Q&A now. Indrakshi, I leave it over to you.
Good afternoon, sir. And this is Rahul Arya from
Hi, Rahul.
Delhi office. So are we open for question and answer session, sir?
Yes, I'm open for the Q&A now. I finished my slides.
Yeah, please, members, please, if you have any question, please drop in the text box so that sir can take up those questions.
I will also have a look at the Q&A to see if there's anything that has come up. Yeah, nothing so far. Hey, I've got a question.
Yeah, one more question.
Okay, shall I take it on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, how can organizations effectively manage risks in uncertain environments? So I think this really goes on to the earlier part of the slide that I was saying. So you need to, as a risk manager, you need to be aware of your internal and your external environment, of where your business is operating into. So given an example of my case study, if you're into a manufacturing company, you need to be aware of your mainly your supply chain, your vendor, your key vendors, your key stakeholders. What regulatory environment are you operating in? You need to be aware of the regulations, the regulatory aspects of your business that it requires it to be operated under, whether it is let's say if you're a data center and you're operating under a particular jurisdiction, then there are certain regulatory licenses you need to get. So I think mostly as a risk manager, be aware of those areas of regulatory requirements, and then you should map out the key customers or vendors, and then avoid the concentration risk and start thinking about the emerging risks that can happen from there, and then take steps towards mitigating it. There's another question. What frameworks can help? Yeah. What frameworks can help with developing a risk management plan? ISO 31000 is a most popular method of or the popular framework for which is used in the risk management space. But you can also use COSO ERM framework. There's a lot of guidance from COSO as well as from ISO. ISO is generally a guideline. COSO is really a bit more prescriptive. These are the broader, most popular standards that are used across. So you can use that from framework perspective. Could you advise what are the measures we can take to avoid perception bias while analyzing risks? Yes. So I think from a perception we can take to avoid perception bias, literally would be sometimes when you're approaching a risk and you're trying to analyze it, you have to kind of have that influencing decision-making power, so that perception bias, as in when you say that, I'm assuming that you are the risk manager and you are challenging the process owner who has the perception bias to take towards the right approach and the risk analysis. So ideally, the measures that you can actually take is looking at historical data, past incidents, and also looking at some of the audit. I mean, for example, the recent audit reports. If it's an area where, for example, if you're looking into a financial reporting of a business or transaction processing, right? Errors or invoicing or payment transaction process. It is really about understanding what has been reported, right? What has been reported in the past, and how many of them have had transaction errors without above a certain threshold. Citing those measures, citing those methods can actually avoid some of these perception biases. Otherwise, it's more like you're going into a discussion with the assumption that it's always going to be there. Yes, inherently it is going to be there. The risk is going to be there, but ideally, what has actually happened on the ground? So maybe from a practical perspective, those are the things you can implement. Waiting for more questions.
There is one question.
Oh yeah.
How do you distinguish between a calculated risk pursuing and the threat that demand mitigation?
How do you distinguish between a calculated risk worth pursuing and a threat that demands mitigation, especially when data is incomplete or contradictory? Okay. Thanks. This is a very interesting question. It's a difficult one actually, but let me put it in a way that would hopefully address this. So because you mentioned about distinguishing a calculated risk worth pursuing, so you're talking about exploiting an opportunity here. When you're talking about a threat that demands mitigation. So incomplete data and contradiction is a problem, I would say, because it's kind of, you cannot go the way I would treat this is, if there is an incomplete data, I would firstly want to get accurate data as to the best I can, right? Contradictory, I don't know what that means, but I would say if you're going to, let's say you're opening up a new, from a risk perspective, you're pursuing a new system, but you're weighing it between which one is a better alternative, right? So you have the data points in terms of the benefit the system can bring, for example, the amount of the manual hours it can reduce. Automation can bring in X number of X dollars or X number of percentage savings, etc., etc. So you go in, you kind of analyze data from that perspective. You measure it against your other, other competitors, meaning to say that you have 3 systems, for example, the other alternatives, and that's how you either exploit that option, or you can say, actually, you know what, this is not the right fit. I mean, sorry, this is not the best fit, but in terms of cost, but it is the right fit based on what I want to do in terms of analysis. In that case, what happens is you've got data in there which supports that it's not the best. It is not the best fit because of cost factor, but it is the right fit based on your analysis that you want to do, moving forward. For example, it has a particular module that will help you in churning out critical analysis or voluminous analysis that you don't want to do using Excel. So those are the kind of things that I would distinguish between. I would approach in terms of distinguishing, calculating. Taking it, whether it's worth it or or not pursuing it. Hopefully that has answered your question. What influence strategies can risk leaders use to shift organizational culture from reactive to proactive, especially when resistance to change is deeply entrenched? Okay, nice one. Influence strategies, the risk leaders that they use to shift organization culture. Sorry, I just missed your question. Hang on a minute. Quite a few that has come up. I have lost the question. Why can't, I have lost the question, Rahul. I can't find it anymore.
Yeah, I will request the member to again post the question because somehow it is disappeared.
Oh wait, sorry, it's published. It's under published, I think. Is it?
They also have checked. It's not there, sir.
No, it's there. Okay, I've got it. What influence strategies can risk leaders use to shift organization culture from reactive to proactive, especially when resistance to change is deeply entrenched? Okay, so the way I would approach this is that firstly, giving the senior leaders the most important answer of the benefits it bring, right? Most importantly, changing from a reactive to a proactive is, see, reactive is a natural process. Something happens, everyone's reacting to it. Everyone's thinking, oh my God, what do I do? And what is do we have a process in place? Do we have an escalation matrix in place? Whom do we need to inform? All of that. So it's reactively there. It's there always. Proactively, it's lacking because it's not a scenario where people are impacted or processes or businesses impacted deeply. It's not a panic situation, right? So the way I have done it is I would construct the quantitative benefits of having a risk management and how it shapes up the strategy of the company. So that could mean that by giving a particular, for example, you have a holistic view of a particular of the entire enterprise-wide risk. You then have you think about the business continuity aspect of it. You then think about scenario planning. You stress test a particular 1 day's failure and how much that loss. So think of quantifying your losses if you can, and best is if you have incidents, because you're saying reactive. So if you have incidents where you can pinpoint and say, look, because you did not have risk management, proactive risk management, the company has had a financial loss amounting to X number of dollars. using those scenarios would be really, really helpful, and that could really change the decision, the strategy from the risk leaders, the management from changing that approach from a reactive to a proactive one. If I mean, hopefully those, and then a lot of cultural awareness and trainings would also benefit. What frameworks can help with developing a risk management plan? I think this is ISO 31000. How can organizations effectively manage risk? I think I've answered that.
Then new, you can try an ecosystem where regulatory landscapes shift faster than operational cycle. How can organization future-proof their risk strategy without becoming overly conservative or missing disruptive opportunities?
Okay, let me have a read. 1 second. Ecosystems shift faster than operational cycles. How can organization future-proof? Okay, one simple answer, quick answer to this would be subscribing to alerts and bulletins from the regulatory articles, the legal, contact your legal and compliance folks. They would have some kind of article bulletins that they get alerts on. So that is an easy answer. That's like the quick answer. The other thing is obviously you as a risk manager will have to keep on top of these regulatory changes through attending seminars or sessions and upskilling yourself, so that you know that these are the regulatory changes that are happening. You may not be able to fix it in the next 2 to 3 months, but at least you know that you have a timeline in place, so that these regulatory environment, I mean, to align and adhere to comply with the regulatory landscape, you at least have a roadmap to implement it. And last question I can take is when risk signals emerge from weak or contradictory data sources, how can leaders distinguish noise from insight and avoid paralysis and recklessness? Well, to completely avoid this scenario, right, which is why I'm saying you need to establish a key risk indicator. You need to establish proper good metrics. Make sure that these metrics are endorsed by the risk committee. The inputs are coming from the risk managers, the process owners or the risk owners, and they are endorsed by the risk committee, and the cadence is regularly there every quarter. By doing this, you will definitely be shifting from, you will not have to worry about having all kind of contradictory views. So it'll be more foolproof. Last question, if influence is the art of shifting perception, how can risk leaders shape stakeholder mindsets around long-term resilience, especially in cultures focused in short-term rewards? This is a global universal problem. I think in terms of, in terms of that, sorry, I think it's moved into published. So in terms of shifting the perception, how can the risk leaders shape? It is really more from a perspective, the risk leader, the genuinely, the finance, the CFO, the C-suite, the senior stakeholders, they generally want to bring in risk management, embed that into their day-to-day business, Unless they do that, the mindset will not shift. The only way it will shift is riding that maturity, the risk maturity across a period of years. So it's cyclical, and it'll work hopefully towards the as you incrementally progress on through the years. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll stop here, and I will allow Rahul to take over from here.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I would first of all like to thank you on the behalf of Institute for giving us such a wonderful presentation, navigating the risk, seize opportunity, identify, improve, and influence. And I myself has learned a lot, and I can see all the participants has also learned, because the quality of question they have asked is very good. So which also that represent the amount that the participants were able to grasp what you were presenting. So I will once again thank you and all the participants for patient listening.
Yeah, Rahulji, please make me live.
Sir,
please make me live.
You are live.
Live, sir.
Thank you, Rahulji. I'm really, I'm very sorry, Saksharji, because you know, you are very close to my heart because your father, Bhaskar Basu, is one of the very esteemed member of Internal Audit Assurance Standard Board. When he proposed to me, I was simply wondering that how you will be simply matching with the people of our fraternity. But now, you know, you have become very dear friend of fraternity. Your sessions, the first sessions, second sessions, these sessions also got huge applaud. I was just because I was in a very important meeting with the government machineries here in West Bengal. I couldn't observe, but sometimes I was listening as a participant like audience. Definitely this total, you know, whatever you have said, your total concept, what you have given, especially in the this particular, you know, 3I, identify, improve, and influence on seize the opportunities on the navigating risk. Actually, the whole today my discussions with the one of the very important machineries of this government was also in the same. Actually, I just mentioned about the how the whole you know, organizations is really they are calibrating their risk profile according to the need of the hour. And today this program, I'm sure that it would be reaching to the peak of the I think the visibility of our institute, because many people will join again, because our system is that we are putting it in our YouTube channel. We have where we have got more than 60,000 viewers. So all these viewers, they will be definitely looking for it because topics very relevant. I would request Saksharji, you please think of some more topics, and I would request you to please give your valuable thoughts and inputs to our members. And I think it will be a good intake for our especially newly qualified CMAs. They will be able to learn. They will be able to, rather I should say, not only learn, because a lot of risk perceptions they have already studied in their syllabus, but they will be relearning from the point of view of the corporate's desire and how they should reshape themselves. With this, I am thankful to you. Just to convey my heartfelt thanks to you, and you know our one of our advisor who is here, CMA Partha Chaudhary. He was ex-central banker. So the risk management is close to his heart. And every time, as you know, the central banker is only they are trying to mitigate the risk in the financial sectors. And you will definitely appreciate Reserve Bank of India is one of the you know, finest and one of the gigantic, you know, having their presence in the central bank world of central bank in the world as a very they have got a tremendous, you know, name and fame in the world, that during the COVID period, during Lehman Brothers, they have fought with several, you know, they have come out with several measures to mitigate the risk in the financial sectors in the country. So with this, if I would request, if Parthoda has got anything to say, kindly Parthoda, you also please convey your message to all the participants here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chittara. And I really appreciate, Mr. Basu, that you have correctly, as a sequel to your first enterprise level discussion, have picked up an entity-wise from scratch to upgradation of the risk perception. I think that's a very, very effective roadmap you have given in today's discussion, that as a consultant or as a risk manager, when I walk into an enterprise who doesn't have anything, how should I start and how should I improve? And as you have very clearly said, that it is not that today I do it and that's the end of it. From tomorrow, there is nothing to improve. So a continuous process of improvement. Thank you very much for your lucid presentation. And I think our members and including me immensely benefited from this very structured presentation which you have given. Thank you very much, Mr. Basu. Looking forward for more from you, courtesy our BFSI board and Chittara. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wanted to just take a quick minute for that. So firstly, ma'am, I mean, very kind words shared by both of you. I take it as an honor for me to share this insightful webinar, and definitely will contribute more towards the future with such topics or different elements of whether it's controls management, risk management, etc. And I want to thank CMA Chittaranjan Chattopadhyay and CMA Partha Chaudhary, everyone really who has been a big part and parcel of making this happen, including Indrakshi, Rahul, and Dipendu. Really thanks. I think I have also learned, during the course preparation and structuring, I learned myself as well. I think it's not just because for me to prepare, I need to revisit of my experiences and bringing that in a bite-sized information. Like time is quite important of the essence for you all of you. So thank you very much once again, and I look forward to speaking again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.